I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who'd rewrite her will out of spite. But then again, I never thought my children would be the kind who'd let me lie alone in a hospital bed for 2 weeks without so much as sending flowers. The monitor beside me beeped in steady rhythm, marking time in a room that felt frozen. Outside, spring had arrived in Oakridge, painting the world in shades of renewal. But from my window on the 3rd floor of Memorial Hospital, all I could see were the shadows of what my life had become. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mrs. Wilson, your vitals are looking good today, Nurse Kim said, adjusting my IV. Any visitors coming? I smiled politely, the lie forming easily on my lips. Yes, my son Michael mentioned he might stop by after work. The kindness in her eyes betrayed that she knew the truth. For 16 days, the only names in my visitor log had been medical staff. The chair beside my bed remained empty, collecting nothing but the weight of my disappointment. As she left, I reached for my phone. Another day, another attempt. The rings echoed hollow before my eldest son's voicemail greeted me. You've reached Michael Wilson, CEO of Wilson Development. I'm unavailable at the moment. I hung up without leaving a message. What was there to say that I hadn't already said in the dozen messages before? The truth is, I'd spent 68 years believing family meant something different than what it apparently meant to my children. I thought it meant showing up, being present, sacrificing. I'd built my entire life around that belief. I was Eleanor Wilson, Ellie to those who knew me before I became Mom or Mrs. Wilson or Grandma. I'd taught high school English for 37 years in Oakridge, a place where generations of families put down roots beneath towering Douglas firs. My students still recognized me in the grocery store, often with genuine smiles that warmed something in me. Mrs. Wilson, you were my favorite teacher, they'd say, and I'd remember why I'd chosen that path. I purchased my Craftsman house on Maple Street when property values were still reasonable, back when my husband James was alive, and we still believed our future held more than just photographs and albums. After James passed from a sudden heart attack 15 years ago, that house became my sanctuary, especially the garden where I coaxed life from soil with the same patience I'd once used to nurture 3 children. All 3 of my children had done well for themselves. Michael, my oldest at 48, had built a successful real estate development company. Becky, 45, was a marketing executive for a major corporation in Seattle. And Daniel, my youngest at 42, had made a fortune in tech startups before semi-retiring to pursue his passion for sailing. They were smart, driven, successful, everything. Apparent hopes for their children, or so I thought. Mom, we're just so busy right now, became their mantra. Phone calls grew shorter, visits more infrequent. Holidays were spent negotiating whose turn it was to host me, like I was a burden to be passed around. Last Christmas, I sat at Michael's gleaming dining table, watching my grandchildren, Ashley, 16, Tyler, 14, and Emma, 12, absorbed in their phones. Jennifer, Michael's wife, served a catered dinner while discussing their upcoming vacation to the Maldives. You should come visit sometime, Mom, Michael said, not looking up from cutting his roast. When things slow down. That would be lovely, I replied, knowing it would never happen. The pattern was similar with Becky and Thomas, who lived in a trendy Seattle high-rise. They'd invite me for precisely timed brunches where Becky would check her watch every few minutes. Daniel, perpetually traveling, would send expensive gifts with cards signed by his assistant. I never complained. I smiled and nodded and told them I understood. After all, isn't that what mothers do? We understand, we forgive, we make excuses. When my birthday arrived in February, I received a floral arrangement from Michael and Jennifer, with a card I'm certain Jennifer selected. Becky sent a text at 9:47 p.m., Daniel forgot altogether. I marked the occasion alone, with a small cake from the local bakery and a glass of wine in my garden, thinking about how I'd once held these same children as they took their first breaths, their first steps, spoke their first words. How I'd sat through countless recitals and games and award ceremonies. How I'd helped pay for their educations, their first cars, their wedding expenses. That evening, I found myself digging through old photo albums. There was Michael, gap-toothed and proud, holding up his science fair trophy. Becky in her ballet costume, all legs and determination. Daniel covered in mud after winning his first soccer championship. Where did we go wrong? I whispered to James's photograph on the mantel. His eyes, so similar to Daniel's, seemed to hold no answers. The next morning, I felt an unusual tightness in my chest while tending to my roses. I dismissed it as heartburn, took an antacid, and continued with my day. By evening, the pain had intensified, radiating down my left arm. Even then, I hesitated to call my children. Instead, I called 911 myself, locked the door behind me, and walked to the ambulance under my own power. A neighbor I barely knew watching from her porch, with more concern than my own children would likely show. At the hospital, things moved quickly. Mild heart attack, Dr. Peters explained, his voice gentle but serious. We've caught it early, but you'll need to stay for observation and possibly a stent procedure. My children, I started, then paused. I should call them. He nodded, handing me my phone before stepping out to give me privacy. I called Michael first, my fingers trembling slightly. Mom, I'm in a meeting, he answered, his voice clipped. I'm in the hospital, I said simply. I've had a heart attack. The silence that followed lasted 3 beats too long. Are you okay? He finally asked. They're keeping me for observation. They mentioned a possible procedure. Okay, well, keep me posted. I've got investors here right now, but I'll try to swing by later if I can wrap this up. He hung up before I could respond. Becky didn't answer at all, so I left a voicemail. Daniel texted back an hour later. That sounds scary. Let me know if you need anything. In Cabo right now, but sending good vibes. Good vibes. My son was sending good vibes instead of his presence. I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling, counting the tiny holes in the acoustic tiles until the pain medication took effect, and I drifted into uneasy sleep. The next morning, Dr. Peters confirmed I would need a stent procedure. Is there someone we should contact to be here with you? He asked. I thought about lying, about preserving the fiction of a devoted family, but something in me had shifted. No, I replied. There's no one. His eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary, and I wondered if he saw the shame there, the failure of a mother whose children couldn't be bothered to show up when she needed them most. The procedure was scheduled for the following day. I spent that night alone with my thoughts and the rhythmic sounds of the hospital. Nurses came and went, each kinder than the last. One brought me an extra blanket without being asked. Another snuck in a cookie from the cafeteria. Such small kindnesses from strangers while my own blood was too busy to call. As I was being wheeled to the cardiac catheterization lab, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. In meetings all day, Jennifer might stop by with a care package. Jennifer never came. Neither did Becky or Daniel. The procedure went well, Dr. Peters assured me afterward. Your heart is stronger than you think, Mrs. Wilson. If only he knew how wrong he was. My heart was breaking in ways no stent could repair. Days passed. I watched other patients receive visitors, spouses holding hands, children bringing homemade food, grandchildren drawing pictures. The flowers on their windowsills multiplied, while mine remained bare except for the arrangement from the hospital volunteer group. I made excuses for my children to the nurses. They live out of state, I lied. In truth, Michael lived 20 minutes away, Becky, an hour. Only Daniel had geographical distance as a legitimate excuse. On the 5th day, Becky finally called. "Mom, I'm so sorry I haven't made it there yet. This product launch is just consuming every minute. How are you feeling?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Better," I said, and it wasn't entirely untrue. Physically, I was improving. Emotionally, something inside me was hardening, crystallizing into a clarity I hadn't possessed before. "That's great. Listen, I was thinking maybe we could move your follow-up care to a facility closer to Michael's. It would be easier for everyone to visit." Translation: it would be more convenient for them to pop in for obligatory 15-minute visits between more important engagements. "I'll think about it," I replied. Later that day, Dr. Peters came by during his rounds. He sat on the edge of my bed, something doctors rarely do, and asked me about my garden. Somehow, we'd begun talking about it during one of his earlier visits. "The irises should be blooming now," I told him. "Purple and yellow ones, near the stone bench." He smiled. "I have a confession to make, Mrs. Wilson. I live in your neighborhood. I've admired your garden many times on my morning runs." "Really? Which house is yours?" "The Blue Craftsman on Cedar Street, just around the corner from you." "With the magnificent rhododendrons?" He nodded, looking pleased. "My wife's pride and joy." We talked for nearly an hour, about gardens, books, the town's history. It was the longest conversation I'd had with anyone in weeks. Before leaving, he hesitated. "Mrs. Wilson, Ellie, if I may, you should know that your recovery is going well. But healing isn't just physical." I met his gaze steadily. "What do you mean?" "I mean that sometimes the greatest injuries aren't the ones we can treat with medicine." He gestured to the empty visitor chair. "I've seen it before. Patients who heal more slowly because they're carrying other burdens." My eyes burned with sudden tears. "They're busy," I said weakly. "Important careers, families of their own." Dr. Peters nodded. "Of course, I understand. Busy. I work 80-hour weeks. But when my mother had her hip replaced last year, I took a week off. Because that's what family does." After he left, I lay awake thinking about that word, family. What did it mean anymore? Was it just shared DNA? Or was it something earned through presence, through showing up? On the 7th day, a floral arrangement arrived from Daniel. The card read, "Get well soon, Mom. Thinking of you." In handwriting that wasn't his. I placed it beside the volunteer flowers and tried to feel grateful. Michael finally visited on day 9. He came during his lunch break, stayed for exactly 22 minutes, and spent most of that time on his phone, putting out fires at work. He kissed my forehead before leaving, promising to return the next day. He didn't. Becky called again on day 12, apologizing profusely. The launch went sideways. "I'm working 16-hour days, Mom. I promise I'll visit as soon as things settle down." By day 14, I was cleared for discharge. Dr. Peters came by to go over my aftercare instructions. "Is someone coming to pick you up?" he asked. I nodded, another lie. I'd already arranged for a hospital transportation service to take me home. "Well, I'm glad to hear it," he said, though something in his expression told me he knew the truth. "You'll need some help for the first few days. No heavy lifting, limited stairs." "I'll be fine," I assured him. He handed me his card. "My personal number is on the back. If you need anything, medical advice, or just someone to check your garden, please call." I was touched by the gesture, by this relative stranger showing more concern than my own children. As the transport service helped me into my empty house, I felt something shift inside me. The familiar walls, the photographs, the garden visible through the back windows, all of it looked different somehow, as if I was seeing it through new eyes. I made my way slowly to James's study, a room I rarely entered. His desk remained as He'd left it, neat and organized. I eased myself into his leather chair and opened the bottom drawer, removing a folder labeled Will and Testament. Inside was the document I'd updated after James's death, dividing everything equally among Michael, Becky, and Daniel. The house that had appreciated to nearly $1.2 million. The investments James had carefully cultivated, the life insurance, policy. All of it would go to 3 people who couldn't spare a few hours to sit with me in the hospital. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Harmon and Associates, how may I direct your call? Robert Harmon, please. Tell him Eleanor Wilson is calling. Robert had been James's attorney and friend. He'd handled our affairs for decades. Ellie! His voice was warm, familiar. It's been too long. How are you? I need to make some changes to my will, I said without preamble. Can you come to my house tomorrow? I'm not supposed to drive yet. Of course, but is everything all right? I gazed at the family portrait on the wall, taken years ago when the children still smiled at me with genuine affection. No, I answered, honestly. But it will be. As I hung up the phone, I noticed a text from Michael. Hope you got home okay. Crazy day here. We'll try to call soon. I set the phone down without replying and turned instead to the window where my garden awaited. The irises were indeed in bloom, just as I'd told Dr. Peters. Purple and yellow heads nodding in the afternoon breeze, resilient and vibrant. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not the polite smile I'd offered the nurses or the brave one I'd worn for Dr. Peters. This was something different. The smile of a woman who had finally seen the truth, who was ready to bloom in unexpected ways. I picked up a pen and began to write, drafting notes for my meeting with Robert. My children had been too busy to visit me in the hospital, and now I would be too busy to include them in my will. Robert Harmon arrived at my doorstep exactly at 2 p.m., punctual as ever. Time had been kinder to him than to me. His once brown hair was now distinguished silver, but his posture remained upright, his eyes sharp behind horn-rimmed glasses. He carried a leather briefcase that looked identical to the one he'd had when James was alive. Ellie, he said warmly, taking my hand between both of his. You're looking well, all things considered. I smiled and ushered him in, moving more slowly than I would have liked. Tea? I've just made a pot. That would be lovely. We settled in the living room where afternoon light filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the hardwood floor. I poured Earl Grey into James's old china cups, the ones I only used for special occasions or moments that required a certain formality. This felt like both. So, Robert said after taking a sip, you mentioned wanting to make changes to your will. May I ask what prompted this? I set my cup down carefully, the soft clink against the saucer filling the momentary silence. I had a heart attack 2 weeks ago. His eyebrows shot up. Ellie, I had no idea. Are you? I'm recovering, I said, cutting him off gently. The doctors expect a full recovery with proper care and rest. That's good news, at least. Were Michael and the others a help during your stay? The question hung in the air. I could have softened the truth, made excuses as I'd done for years. Instead, I looked directly into Robert's eyes. None of my children visited me during my 2-week hospital stay, I said. Michael came once, for 22 minutes, most of which he spent on his phone. Becky called twice. Daniel sent flowers with a card signed by his assistant. Robert's expression shifted from surprise to something darker, disappointment perhaps, or anger on my behalf. He had known my children since they were young, had watched them grow up alongside his own. I see, he said finally, his tone carefully measured. No, I don't think you do, I replied, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. For 15 days, I lay in that hospital bed wondering if I had somehow failed as a mother. If I had raised children incapable of basic compassion, if the values James and I thought we were instilling simply never took root. I stood up, moving, to the mantelpiece where family photographs chronicled decades of birthdays, graduations, weddings. But then I realized something, Robert. I didn't fail them. They failed me. He nodded slowly. And now you want to change your will. Yes. May I ask what changes you have in mind? I returned to my seat, pulling out the notes I'd prepared. I want to remove Michael, Rebecca, and Daniel as primary beneficiaries. The house, the investments, the insurance, none of it should go to them. If Robert was shocked, he didn't show it. Instead, he slipped into the professional demeanor I'd seen him use in more challenging legal matters. Ellie, while I understand your feelings, and believe me, I sympathize, decisions about wills shouldn't be made in haste or anger. This isn't hasty, I countered. And it's not just about anger. It's about consequence, about teaching a lesson. They should have learned long ago. And who would you name as beneficiary instead? I hadn't gotten that far in my thinking. In truth, I'd been so focused on what I was taking away that I hadn't fully considered what to do with it. I'm not sure yet. Maybe charities. The local hospital has an excellent cardiac care unit. Robert made a note, then asked carefully, "Have you spoken with your children about how their absence affected you?" "They haven't given me the opportunity," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "But honestly, Robert, what would be the point? Would it change anything? Would it make them suddenly care?" He sighed, setting his pen down. "Ellie, I've known you for what, 30 years now? In all that time, I've never known you to be vindictive. Determined, yes. Principled, absolutely. But not vindictive. People change," I said quietly. "Heart, attacks have a way of clarifying things. Fair enough." He reached for his briefcase. "I'll draw up a draft amendment to your will based on your notes, but I won't file anything for 30 days. That gives you time to reflect, to perhaps have those conversations with your children." I started to protest, but he held up a hand. "This is standard procedure, Ellie. Making significant changes to estate plans requires a cooling-off period to ensure the changes reflect your true wishes rather than temporary emotions." Reluctantly, I nodded. "Fine. 30 days. After Robert." Left, I stood at my living room window, watching as he backed out of the driveway. The street was quiet, neighbors still at work. A mail carrier made his way down the opposite side, moving with the unhurried pace of someone with a familiar route. My phone buzzed on the side table. A text from Becky. "Hope you're settling in okay at home. We'll try to swing by this weekend, if this project wraps up." I didn't respond. Instead, I slipped on a light jacket and made my way carefully to the garden. It felt alien to move so cautiously through my own space, to approach the flower beds with such tentativeness. But the stitches from the stent procedure still pulled if I moved too quickly, a physical reminder of my new vulnerability. The garden welcomed me back with vibrant color and fragrance. I lowered myself onto the stone bench, feeling the cool surface through my thin slacks. This space had always been my sanctuary, the place where I felt most at peace. Today, though, there was a different quality to the solitude, less peaceful, more stark. "Mrs. Wilson, Ellie?" I turned to find Dr. Peters standing at the garden gate, still dressed in hospital scrubs beneath a light jacket. "I hope you don't mind," he said, looking suddenly uncertain. "I was driving home and thought I'd check on you. Professional obligation. And all that." I gestured to the empty space beside me on the bench. "Not at all. Please join me." He settled beside me, his eyes taking in the carefully tended beds. "Even more beautiful up close," he remarked. "These irises are spectacular." "Thank you. They were my husband's favorite." "James, right? You mentioned him during your stay." I nodded, oddly touched that he remembered such a detail amidst the hundreds of patients he must see. "How are you feeling? Any unusual discomfort? Shortness of breath?" "Physically, I'm fine," I said, following doctor's orders to the letter. "And otherwise?" I looked at him, this relative stranger who had somehow become a more consistent presence in my recent life than my own children. "I'm angry," I admitted. "Disappointed, maybe a little lost." He nodded slowly. "All normal reactions. A health crisis can be clarifying." That's exactly what I told my lawyer this afternoon. Dr. Peters raised an eyebrow but didn't pry. Instead, he gestured toward a clutch of unopened buds. "What are those? They look ready to bloom." "Daylilies, orange and yellow. They should open within the week." "Something to look forward to, then." The simple observation struck me with unexpected force. Something to look forward to. When was the last time I'd genuinely looked forward to anything? "Yes," I said softly. "I suppose it is." We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes before he stood. "I should get going. My wife will wonder where I am." "Of course. Thank you for checking on me, Dr. Peters." "Raymond," he corrected with a smile. "After sharing a garden bench, I think we can use first names." "Raymond," I echoed. "Thank you." "You're welcome. Ellie. And remember, no heavy gardening for at least 2 more weeks." After he left, I remained on the bench until the cooling evening air forced me inside. Something to look forward to. The phrase kept repeating in my mind like a mantra, a challenge, a question. The house felt emptier than usual that night. I'd lived alone for 15 years, but this solitude felt different, more deliberate somehow. I wandered from room to room, seeing each space with new eyes. The guest bedroom that had once been Becky's, still decorated with faded ballet trophies. The basement rec room where Daniel had played video games with friends. The formal dining room where we'd gathered for holidays. The table that could seat 12 now hidden beneath a protective cloth, unused for years. This house had been built for a family. What was its purpose now? In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator and stared at its meager contents. I hadn't had the energy to go grocery shopping since returning home. The hospital had provided a meal. Delivery service for my first 3 days back. Standard procedure for cardiac patients. But that had ended yesterday. Now there was just half a loaf of bread, some cheese, and various condiments. The doorbell rang, startling me from my inventory. It was nearly 8 o'clock, too late for casual visitors. For a wild moment, I imagined it might be one of my children, struck by sudden remorse. Instead, I opened the door to find a woman roughly my age holding a covered dish. It took me a moment to place her, Rita Sanderson, from 3 houses down. We exchanged pleasantries at neighborhood events, but had never been close. "Ellie, I heard you were in the hospital," she said, offering the dish. "Vegetable lasagna. Easy to reheat and heart-healthy, according to my daughter, the nutritionist." "That's very kind of you, Rita. Thank you." She waved away my thanks. "The neighborhood association takes care of its own. We would have come sooner, but we only just found out. Your children didn't let anyone know." The casual observation stung more than it should have. "Well, they're very busy," I said automatically, the familiar excuse slipping out. Rita gave me a look I couldn't quite interpret. "Aren't we all?" It wasn't a question. "Anyway, there's a sign-up sheet going around. You'll be getting meals for the next 2 weeks, and Herb Johnson is putting your name on the lawn service rotation." "That's really not necessary." "Necessary isn't the point, Ellie. It's what neighbors do." She glanced over my shoulder into the empty house. "Are you managing all right otherwise? Need any help with daily tasks, transportation?" "I'm fine. Really, the doctor says I'm recovering well." She nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Well, don't hesitate to call if you need anything. My number's on the casserole dish. Just return it whenever you're feeling up to it." After she left, I sat at the kitchen table with a small portion of the still warm lasagna, stunned by this unexpected kindness. In 15 years of widowhood, it had never occurred to me to rely on neighbors, to see them as anything more than familiar faces to nod to while collecting the mail. I'd been so focused on my children, on maintaining those increasingly threadbare connections, that I'd overlooked an entire community around me. The realization was both comforting and disquieting. The next morning brought another surprise. A knock at the door revealed a young man in his late teens, gangly and awkward, shifting from foot to foot. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Jake. Mr. Johnson sent me to mow your lawn." Before I could protest, he was already wheeling a lawnmower from the back of a pickup truck parked at the curb. I watched from the porch as he made neat passes across my front yard, the smell of fresh-cut grass filling the air. When he finished, I tried to press a $20 bill into his hand, but he shook his head. "Already taken care of, ma'am. Mr. Johnson said to tell you he's got your yard on the rotation for the next month." As he drove away, my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when he was multitasking. "How are you feeling?" "Better every day," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Good. "Listen, Jennifer and I were thinking you might want to look into one of those senior living communities. You know, the nice ones with activities and medical staff on site." I sank into a chair, the air suddenly thin in my lungs. "What are you talking about, Michael?" "Well, after this heart thing, we're worried about you being alone in that big house. What if something happens and no one's there?" "Something did happen," I said quietly. "I had a heart attack and spent 2 weeks in the hospital, alone." The silence that followed was brief but telling. "Right. Well, that's exactly why we think a community might be better. There'd be people around, emergency services. There are people around here. My neighbors have been very supportive." He made a dismissive sound. "Come on, Mom. You barely know those people. This is about your safety." "Is it?" I asked, a dangerous calm settling over me. "Or is it about the house?" "What? No, of course not. What does the house have to do with anything?" "Oakridge has become quite valuable, Michael. Property values have tripled since your father and I bought this place. I imagine a developer like you knows exactly what this lot could sell for if it were available." His voice took on an edge I rarely heard directed at me. "That's unfair. I'm talking about what's best for you." "Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're talking about what's most convenient for you." "Mom, you're being irrational. This is exactly why we're concerned." "I'm going to stop you right there," I interrupted, surprising both of us. "I am perfectly capable of managing my own life and making my own decisions. I will not be pressured into leaving my home because it makes you feel less guilty about neglecting me." "Neglecting? That's ridiculous. We're all just trying to—" "Goodbye, Michael." I ended the call and set the phone down with trembling hands. Almost immediately, it rang again. I ignored it, watching as his name flashed persistently for nearly a minute before going silent. A text followed. "This conversation isn't over. We need to talk about this rationally." I deleted it without responding. The audacity was breathtaking. 2 weeks of virtual silence while I lay in a hospital bed, and now suddenly he was deeply concerned about my welfare? Concerned enough to suggest I surrender my independence, my home, my garden? The anger that surged through me was so intense, it felt like a physical force, propelling me out of the chair and into James's study. I pulled out the folder Robert had left with me, the draft amendment to my will, not to be finalized for 30 days. I reread the provisions, noting how careful Robert had been with the language, how he'd built in room for reconciliation even while honoring my wishes to disinherit my children. They didn't deserve such consideration. I picked up the phone again, this time dialing Robert's office. "Harmon and Associates." This is Eleanor Wilson. I need to speak with Robert, please. When Robert came on the line, I cut straight to the point. I want to accelerate the changes to my will. I don't need 30 days. He sighed, a sound heavy with understanding. What happened, Ellie? Michael just called to suggest I move into a senior living facility. For my own good, of course. I see. No, I don't think you do. He's never once asked about my recovery. Never offered to help with groceries or medication or anything practical. But he's suddenly very concerned about me living alone in a house that sits on nearly an acre of prime Oakridge real estate. Robert was silent for a moment. I understand your frustration, but this isn't frustration, Robert. This is clarity. I've spent decades making excuses for my children's indifference. I'm done. Another pause, longer this time. All right, I'll file the amendments tomorrow. But Ellie, there's something you should know about disinheriting children. What's that? It often leads to challenges after death. Allegations of undue influence, diminished capacity, coercion. It can get ugly. I hadn't considered that, but it didn't change my resolve. Then we'll make it ironclad, whatever it takes. That would mean psychiatric evaluations, perhaps. Videotape statements of intent. It's intrusive, Ellie. So be it. After hanging up, I sat at James's desk for a long time, staring at the photograph of us on our 30th anniversary, the last one before his death. We looked happy, unaware of how little time we had left together. James had been my anchor for so long. Without him, I'd allowed myself to become a footnote in my children's lives, grateful for whatever scraps of attention they deigned to give me. No more. The doorbell rang again, pulling me from my thoughts. This time, it was a middle-aged woman I vaguely recognized from neighborhood association meetings, bearing a tuna casserole. Behind her, I could see another neighbor unloading a small rototiller from his truck, heading toward my garden. "Hope you don't mind," the woman said, following my gaze. "Stan heard you weren't supposed to do heavy gardening for a while. He's just going to turn that new bed you'd marked out by the fence." I blinked back unexpected tears. That's incredibly thoughtful. She shrugged as if it were nothing. "That's what community is for, right? By the way, I'm Diane. I know we've met at the neighborhood picnics, but of course, Diane. Please, come in." I spent the afternoon getting to know a woman who had lived 4 blocks away for 8 years. We discovered a shared love of mystery novels, a mutual distaste for the city council's new parking regulations, and the fact that we'd both been teachers. She in mathematics, retired just last year. "You should come to book club," she said, as she was leaving. "First Thursday of every month. Nothing fancy, just wine and good conversation." For the first time since returning from the hospital, I felt something like anticipation. I'd like that. That evening, I received texts from both Becky and Daniel, clearly orchestrated by Michael. Becky: "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation. Michael says you're being stubborn." Daniel: "Hey, Mom, heard you had a rough call with Michael. Maybe consider what he's saying? We're worried about you." I didn't respond to either message. Instead, I sat in my garden as dusk fell, watching fireflies begin their nightly dance among the flowers. The neighbor, Stan, had done a beautiful job preparing the new bed. Come spring, it would be perfect for the rose bushes I'd been planning to add. My phone rang again. Becky this time. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message. "Mom, I don't know why you're being so difficult about this. We're trying to help. Michael found a really nice place in Maplewood Heights. It's like a resort, honestly. They have garden plots for residents and everything. Just call me back." Okay. Garden plots. As if my carefully cultivated half-acre of botanical diversity could be replaced by a 4x4 patch of communal dirt. As if my life could be condensed and relocated for convenience, like furniture being rearranged in a room. The next morning brought a cascade of calls and texts. each more insistent than the last. Michael had apparently rallied his siblings into a unified front. The messages ranged from concerned to cajoling to thinly veiled threats. "Mom, if you won't be reasonable, we might need to look into guardianship options." That one, from Michael, sent a chill down my spine. I called Robert. Immediately. "They're talking about guardianship now," I said without preamble when he answered. "Can they do that?" "Not easily, no," he assured me. "You'd need to be deemed incapable of making your own decisions. A heart attack doesn't qualify, especially when you're clearly recovering well." But they could try? They could, but it would be an uphill battle without significant evidence of cognitive decline or self-neglect. "Is there something specific you're worried about?" I hesitated, then admitted, "I'm worried they'll make up something. Say I'm unstable or confused. Michael's always been persuasive when he wants something." Robert's voice took on an edge I rarely heard from him. "Ellie, listen to me. I've known you for 3 decades. You're one of the most level-headed people I've ever met. If Michael or anyone else tries to claim otherwise, they'll have me to deal with. And I'm a very, very good lawyer." His words steadied me. "Thank you, Robert. In the meantime, it might be wise to have a medical evaluation. On record. Cognitive function, decision-making capacity, the works. Makes it harder for anyone to claim you're not of sound mind. I'll arrange it. And Ellie, document everything. Every call, every text. Keep a record." After we hung up, I sat down with a notebook and began meticulously recording the morning's communications, times, dates, exact wording where I could remember it. It felt strange, almost paranoid to be documenting interactions with my own children as if preparing for legal battle. But Robert was right. I needed protection. The doorbell rang yet again, interrupting my note-taking. This time, it was Raymond. Peters, not in scrubs but casual weekend clothes. "Official follow-up visit," he said with a smile that softened the formality of the words. "Hospital protocol for cardiac patients 1 week post-discharge." I invited him in, oddly grateful for the interruption. He conducted a brief examination. Blood pressure, heart rate, a few questions about medications and symptoms. "Everything looks good," he pronounced, packing his stethoscope back into a small medical bag. "You're healing well, Ellie." I must have looked skeptical because he added, "Physically at least. The rest takes longer." "The rest?" "Finding your new normal." Adjusting to the reality that life has changed, even if the changes aren't visible. He glanced around the living room, taking in the family photographs, the well-worn furniture. It's often the emotional recovery that's the most challenging. Something about his matter-of-fact kindness broke through the careful composure I'd been maintaining. "My children want to put me in a home," I blurted out. "They think I can't manage by myself anymore." If he was surprised by this sudden confession, he didn't show it. "And what do you think?" "I think they see an opportunity to get their inheritance early." He nodded slowly. "That's, unfortunately common. More common than we'd like to admit in medicine." "What do you mean?" "Family dynamics often shift when health crises happen. I've seen it countless times. Children who suddenly become very interested in a parent's assets under the guise of concern." He hesitated, then added, "I'm not saying that's definitely what's happening here, but it fits the pattern," I finished for him. "Yes." We sat in silence for a moment before he asked gently, "Do you want to stay in your home?" "More than anything." "Then fight for it, and know that you're not alone in that fight." After he left, I felt something settling in me, a resolve, a certainty. This house, this garden, this life, they were mine. Hard-earned, carefully tended, deeply loved. No one had the right to take them from me, especially not children who couldn't be bothered to visit me in the hospital. I picked up my phone and typed out a single message, sending it to Michael, Becky, and Daniel simultaneously. I will not be discussing senior living facilities, guardianship, or any changes to my living situation. My health is improving daily, and I am fully capable of managing my own affairs. Any further attempts to pressure me will be met with legal action. This is not up for debate. Then I blocked their numbers. It was a drastic step, one that sent a tremor of doubt through me even as I confirmed the action. These were my children, my flesh and blood, the people I had raised, loved, sacrificed for. Cutting them off, even temporarily, felt like severing a limb. But as I set the phone down, I also felt a profound sense of relief. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was putting myself first. My needs, my wishes, my dignity. The garden called to me then, its colors more vibrant than ever in the late afternoon light. I made my way carefully outside, settling onto the stone bench with a small notebook. If I couldn't tend the flowers physically yet, I could at least plan. New plantings for summer, bulbs to order for fall, the rose varieties I'd dreamed of adding to that newly prepared bed. As I sketched and made notes, a sense of peace settled over me. This garden would bloom again, with or without my children's approval. And so, I realized, would I? 3 days passed with no contact from my children. I kept expecting to feel the ache of their absence more acutely, but instead found myself settling into a new routine, one built around my recovery and the unexpected support system that had materialized around me. Each morning brought a different neighbor with breakfast or offers of assistance. Rita helped me organize my medications in a weekly pill case. Stan returned to install a drip irrigation system in the newly prepared garden bed. So you won't have to worry about watering while you're still taking it easy. Diane brought books from her personal collection and stayed for tea, filling my quiet house with laughter I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Raymond Peters stopped by every other day, initially under the guise of medical follow-ups, but increasingly, just to check in. We'd sit in the garden, discussing everything from local politics to classic literature to the best techniques for propagating hydrangeas. His company was easy, undemanding, a friendship forming in the gentlest of ways. On the 4th day after blocking my children's numbers, a certified letter arrived from Michael. I recognized his law firm's letterhead immediately. Dear Mother, it began with formal coldness. Your recent behavior has raised serious concerns about your mental and emotional stability following your cardiac event. Your refusal to discuss reasonable safety measures and your abrupt cutting of communication suggest you may not be thinking clearly. If this concerning pattern continues, we will be forced to pursue a temporary guardianship to ensure your well-being. The letter continued with clinical detachment, laying out the case he intended to make, that my judgment was impaired, that I was making irrational decisions, that intervention was necessary for my own protection. It was signed not by my son, but by Michael Wilson Esquerdo. My hands trembled as I set the letter down. I had anticipated something like this, but seeing it in black and white, the clinical pathologizing of my independence, the thinly veiled threat, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with my health condition. I called Robert immediately. They're making their move, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Michael sent a letter suggesting he'll seek guardianship if I don't cooperate. Robert's response was immediate and forceful. Forward it to me right away. Don't respond. And Ellie, schedule that cognitive assessment we discussed as soon as possible. I made the appointment for the following day, managing to secure a last-minute cancellation slot with a respected neuropsychologist in the city. Robert made some calls and arranged for a colleague to accompany me, a second attorney who specialized in elder law and guardianship cases. A precaution, he explained. Having legal representation present during the evaluation strengthens your position. The assessment itself was grueling. 4 hours of memory tests, problem-solving exercises, interviews about daily living skills, financial management abilities. By the end, I was mentally exhausted but quietly confident. I had always prided myself on my sharp mind, and despite the emotional turmoil of recent weeks, I knew I had performed well. "You did excellently," confirmed Patricia Winters, Robert's colleague, as we left the neuropsychologist's office. "Dr. Feldman indicated your cognitive function is well above average for your age group, and there's absolutely no evidence of impairment in decision-making capacity. So Michael has no case." "Based on cognitive function? None whatsoever." She hesitated before adding, "But these situations can get complicated when emotions and family dynamics are involved. Judges sometimes err on the side of caution, especially with elderly individuals who live alone." The word elderly stung more than it should have. At 68, I didn't feel elderly. Or at least I hadn't until my heart tried to betray me and my children revealed their true colors. "What do we do next?" I asked as Patricia drove me home. "We prepare, document your independence, gather evidence of community support and engagement. Demonstrate that you have a robust care network that doesn't rely solely on your children." She glanced at me. "Do you have friends or neighbors who would be willing to provide statements about your capabilities?" I thought of Rita, Stan, Diane, people who had known me for years in a peripheral way but had stepped forward when needed. "Yes, I believe so." "Good. And you mentioned a doctor who's been checking on you regularly?" "Raymond Peters. He lives in the neighborhood." His professional assessment would carry significant weight. When she dropped me off, Patricia handed me a business card. "Call me anytime, Ellie. And try not to worry too much. Based on what I've seen today, any petition for guardianship would face an uphill battle." I nodded, but as I watched her drive away, worry settled like a stone in my, stomach. Even if Michael couldn't win a guardianship case, the mere process of fighting it would be draining, emotionally, physically, financially. Was that his strategy? To wear me down until surrender seemed easier than resistance? Inside, I found another certified letter waiting, this one from Becky. Its tone was softer than Michael's legal threat, but its message was essentially the same. I was being unreasonable, my behavior was concerning, my independence might need to be curtailed, for my own good. What struck me most was how neither of them acknowledged their absence during my hospitalization. There was no recognition that they had failed me when I needed them most, no admission that their sudden concern might seem suspiciously timed. In their narrative, they were the devoted children, and I was the difficult parent whose judgment had been compromised by illness. The rewriting of our family history was breathtaking in its audacity. I was still processing this when the doorbell rang. Raymond stood on the porch, a small paper bag in his hand. "I brought fresh scones from that bakery on Cedar Street," he said, noting my expression with concern. "Bad timing?" I managed a thin smile. "Actually, your timing couldn't be better. I could use a friend right now." Over tea and still warm scones, I told him about the letters, about Michael's threat of guardianship, about the cognitive assessment I'd just completed. Raymond listened without interruption, his physician's face revealing nothing. When I finished, he asked simply, "How can I help?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. "I'm not sure anyone can help with this." "That's not true," he said gently. "You have resources, Ellie. Legal counsel, neighbors who care about you, medical professionals who can attest to your capabilities." He hesitated, then added, "Including me." "You'd be willing to get involved?" "Without hesitation, I can provide a medical assessment confirming your decision-making capacity remains intact. I can document your excellent recovery progress and your ability to manage your health needs." His voice grew firmer. "I've seen enough cases of adult children trying to control elderly parents under the guise of concern. I won't stand by and watch it happen to you." The vehemence in his tone was surprising coming from the typically measured doctor. "This seems personal for you," I observed. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze shifting to the garden visible through my kitchen window. "My mother went through something similar after my father died. Her children from a previous marriage, my step-siblings, tried to force her into assisted living so they could sell her house." His jaw tightened at the memory. "She fought it, but the stress took a toll. She had a stroke during the legal proceedings and ended up in a facility anyway. Exactly what she hadn't wanted." "I'm so sorry." "It taught me something important about aging in our society. Too often, convenience masquerades as concern. Autonomy is treated as expendable once you reach a certain age." He turned back to me, his expression resolute. "I couldn't help my mother as much as I wanted to then. I was still in medical school without resources or influence, but I can help you now." That evening, after Raymond left, I sat in James's study again, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of our life together. Photographs, books, the certificate of appreciation he'd received after 30 years at the same company. What would he think of all this? Of our children's behavior, of my response, of the legal battle potentially looming ahead? I could almost hear his voice, practical and direct as always. "They're showing you who they are, Ellie. Believe them." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. As I was having coffee on the back porch, a car pulled into my driveway, a sleek black SUV I recognized as belonging to Jennifer, Michael's wife. From it emerged not just Jennifer but also my 16-year-old granddaughter Ashley, looking uncomfortable and out of place. I steeled myself as they approached. Jennifer, leading with determined steps, Ashley trailing reluctantly behind. "Eleanor," Jennifer began without preamble, using my full name as she always did. "We need to talk." I remained seated, taking a deliberate sip of my coffee. "Hello, Jennifer." "Hello, Ashley." "What a surprise." Jennifer's expression tightened at my calm demeanor. She'd always been a woman who expected deference, particularly from her mother-in-law. "Michael is very concerned about your recent behavior. We all are." "How kind of you to worry," I replied evenly. "Would you like some coffee? I've just made a fresh pot." Ashley shifted awkwardly beside her mother. "Hi, Grandma," she said, softly, the first genuine words spoken since their arrival. "Hello, sweetheart. How's school? Still enjoying your photography class?" Jennifer cut in before Ashley could answer. "We're not here for small talk, Eleanor. This is serious. Michael says you've blocked everyone's numbers and are refusing to discuss practical solutions for your situation." "My situation?" I echoed, keeping my voice pleasant. "Your health crisis, your living arrangement, your future." She gestured vaguely around at my garden, my home, as if they were problems to be solved rather than the life I'd carefully built. "I'm recovering well, thank you for asking. My doctor is quite pleased with my progress." Jennifer's nostrils flared slightly. "That's not... And my living arrangement is perfectly suited to my needs. I have wonderful neighbors who check in daily. The garden is thriving. I've even joined a book club." Ashley's eyes widened slightly at this transformation in her usually accommodating grandmother. She glanced between Jennifer and me, a witness to the subtle power struggle unfolding on my back porch. "Eleanor," Jennifer tried again, her voice taking on the condescending tone one might use with a stubborn child. "This isn't about your garden or your book club. It's about safety and practicality. Michael has found an excellent community where you'd have everything you need. Except my home, my independence, my dignity." I set my coffee cup down carefully. "Tell me, Jennifer, why is Michael suddenly so concerned about my welfare? He couldn't spare 23 minutes to visit me in the hospital, but now he's researching senior living options?" Jennifer's face flushed. "That's unfair. Michael was dealing with the Oakridge project deadline. You know how important that development is to the company." More important than his mother having a heart attack? How flattering. Ashley made a small sound that might have been suppressed laughter. Jennifer shot her a warning look before turning back to me. This isn't productive. The point is, we're worried about you living alone after such a serious health event. What if you'd had that heart attack when no one was around to call for help? I did have that heart attack when no one was around, I reminded her. I called 911 myself and walked to the ambulance under my own power. I'm quite capable of managing emergencies, as it turns out. Jennifer's composure was slipping. Michael said you might be difficult about this. Did he? How interesting that he sent you to deal with difficult me instead of coming himself. I turned my attention to Ashley, who was studying a cluster of daylilies with determined focus. Ashley, why don't you go look at the new roses while your mother and I finish our conversation? They're just coming into bloom by the stone bench. She glanced at Jennifer, who gave a curt nod, clearly happy to have this awkward conversation without an audience. As Ashley wandered toward the roses, I faced Jennifer directly. Let's be honest with each other, shall we? This isn't about my health or my safety. It's about my house and my assets. Jennifer's eyes narrowed. That's a terrible accusation. Is it? Michael is a real estate developer. This property has tripled in value since James and I purchased it. The neighborhood is being rezoned for multifamily dwellings. Surely you can understand why I might question the timing of this sudden concern. You're being paranoid, she snapped, the veneer of solicitude finally cracking. This is exactly why Michael is worried about your mental state. I smiled, an expression that clearly unnerved her. Interesting that you jump straight to questioning my sanity rather than addressing the substance of my concerns. This is pointless, Jennifer said, standing abruptly. I told Michael you wouldn't listen to reason. No, you told Michael what he wanted to hear because that's what you always do. But I'm curious about something, Jennifer. Did you ever stop to consider that I might outlive you, that I might remain independent and healthy for another 20 years? Where does that leave your plans for my property? The look she gave me was cold enough to frost the roses. Ashley, she called sharply, we're leaving. My granddaughter returned reluctantly, her phone in hand. But I just got here. Can't I stay a little while? Dad said I could visit with Grandma. Jennifer hesitated, clearly torn between her desire to make a dramatic exit and the complication of Ashley's request. Fine. I'll pick you up in an hour. Not a minute longer. As Jennifer's SUV pulled away, Ashley turned to me with an expression that was part awe, part concern. Grandma, I've never seen you stand up to Mom like that. I smiled, genuinely this time. Neither had she. Come, sit. With me. Tell me about school, about your photography, about anything that doesn't involve real estate or senior living communities. Ashley settled beside me, relaxing visibly now that Jennifer was gone. Your garden looks amazing. Can I take some pictures for my portfolio? Of course. As she wandered the garden with her phone camera, stopping to capture close-ups of blooms and interesting textures, I watched her with a pang of mingled love and sadness. Ashley had always been different from her parents, more thoughtful, less materialistic, genuinely curious about the world. In her, I sometimes glimpsed the child Michael had been before ambition hardened him. Grandma, she called from near the fence line. What are these blue flowers? They're incredible. Delphiniums, I answered, joining her. Your grandfather planted those. They come back every year. Ashley framed a shot carefully. I don't really remember Grandpa. I was only 4 when he died. He would have loved your photography. He always had an eye for beauty. She lowered her phone, looking suddenly serious. Dad said you're being difficult about moving into a retirement home. The directness was refreshing after Jennifer's manipulative approach. What do you think? Should I leave my home because your father thinks it's best? Ashley considered this with more thoughtfulness than most adults would muster. I don't know. It's your life, isn't it? Don't you get to decide where you live? That's exactly right. But Dad says you're not thinking clearly because of your heart attack. I gestured around at the meticulously maintained garden, the house beyond it with its freshly painted trim and clean windows. Does this look like the home of someone who can't think clearly? She shook her head slowly. No, it looks nice. Better than our house, honestly. Mom's too busy for gardening. She hesitated, then added quietly, I thought it was weird that no one visited you in the hospital. I wanted to, but Mom said you were too sick for visitors. The revelation stung, but didn't surprise me. I was never too sick for visitors, Ashley. I would have loved to see you. Her face fell. I knew it. I told Dad we should go, but he said the hospital was depressing and you'd understand. An idea struck me then. A small test. Ashley, do you remember the silver locket your grandfather gave me for our 30th anniversary? The one with the pearl inlay? Her brow furrowed. I don't think so. It's very special to me. Would you like to see it? I'd like you to have it someday. Her eyes widened. Really? You'd give it to me? Of course. Come inside, I'll show you. In my bedroom, I opened my jewelry box and carefully lifted out the locket. It was genuinely precious to me. James had saved for months to buy it, and it contained a tiny photograph of us on our wedding day. It's beautiful, Ashley breathed, touching it reverently. When your grandfather gave me this, he said something. I've never forgotten. He said, Ellie, true worth isn't in things, but in how we cherish them. This locket isn't valuable because of its materials, but because of the love it represents. Ashley nodded solemnly. I get that. I'm glad. I closed the jewelry box. Would you like some lemonade? I made fresh this morning. In the kitchen, as Ashley sipped her lemonade, I asked casually, Has your father mentioned anything about changing my will? She looked surprised. Your will? No. He just talks about getting you into that Maplewood place. So Michael hadn't shared his full intentions with Ashley. Interesting. Do you know if your dad is having financial difficulties? I probed gently. With his business, perhaps? Ashley set down her glass, looking uncomfortable. I don't know about his business stuff, but... She hesitated, clearly weighing loyalty against honesty. Mom and Dad have been fighting about money lately. I heard them arguing about the mortgage and some investment that didn't work out. The piece clicked into place. Michael wasn't just after my property out of general greed. He needed it. The real estate market had been volatile lately, and over-leveraged developers were particularly vulnerable. Thank you for telling me, Ashley. I appreciate your honesty. When Jennifer returned precisely 1 hour later, Ashley hugged me tightly before leaving. I'll come back soon, she whispered. I promise. I watched them drive away with mixed emotions. The visit had confirmed my suspicions about Michael's motivations, but it had also reminded me of what I stood to lose by cutting ties with my family. Not just the ungrateful adult children, but also the granddaughter who seemed to genuinely care. That evening, Robert called with an update. Good news, Ellie. Dr. Feldman's assessment was unequivocal. You scored in the top percentile for cognitive function in your age group. If Michael tries to claim diminished capacity, we have solid evidence to the contrary. That is good news. I agreed, though the victory felt hollow. But Robert, I've been thinking, is there a way to protect my assets and my autonomy without completely disinheriting my children? He was quiet for a moment. There are options. We could set up a trust with specific conditions, ensure your house and other major assets remain under your control during your lifetime, with distributions only after your passing, and perhaps with certain stipulations. What kind of stipulations? That varies widely. Some people require regular family visits or involvement during their lifetime. Others specify that beneficiaries must achieve certain milestones: education, community service, sustained employment. Some include ethical conduct clauses. I considered this. Could I require them to make weekly hospital visits if I'm ever admitted again? Robert chuckled softly. That's unusually specific, but yes, it could be arranged. The challenge would be verification. I'm not ready to give up on them entirely, I admitted. Especially Ashley. She's different from her parents. Then we'll find a middle path. Protection for you now, possibility for them later. After we hung up, I went to the back porch with a glass of wine. My first since the heart attack, doctor approved. In moderation. The garden was transitioning from day to evening, that magical hour when colors deepen and shadows soften. A gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the trellis near the fence. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. Grandma? It's Ashley. I'm using my friend's phone. Ashley? Is everything all right? Yeah, I wanted to tell you something. She lowered her voice. After we left your house, Mom told Dad that you accused them of wanting your money and property. Dad got really upset and said some things. My heart sank. What things, sweetheart? He said you were being manipulative and paranoid. But then he said something weird about how your house was worth more as a teardown for condos than as a single-family home. It didn't sound like he was planning for you to live there much longer. The confirmation of my fears should have devastated me, but instead, it merely solidified my resolve. Thank you for telling me, Ashley. That was brave of you. I don't think they're being fair to you, she said, her voice small. And I don't think they're telling the truth about the hospital either. No, they're not. But let's keep this conversation between us for now, all right? I don't want you getting in trouble with your parents. After we said goodbye, I sat for a long time, watching darkness settle over the garden. The path forward was becoming clearer. I needed to protect myself from Michael's schemes while maintaining relationships with the family members who genuinely cared. Ashley, perhaps Daniel if he could be separated from his siblings' influence. The next morning, I called Patricia Winters, Robert's colleague who specialized in elder law. I'd like to discuss setting up a trust, I told her. One that protects my assets and independence during my lifetime, but still provides for certain family members under specific conditions after my passing. That's quite doable, she assured me. We'd need to meet to discuss details. Are you free this afternoon? I agreed to the meeting, then made a second call to Raymond. Would you be willing to serve as an independent medical evaluator if Michael pursues this guardianship nonsense? Your professional opinion would carry significant weight. Absolutely, he replied without hesitation. I've already started documenting your recovery progress and cognitive clarity in my notes, anticipating this might be necessary. With these pieces in motion, I felt a growing sense of control returning. My children had underestimated me, assuming that age and illness had rendered me passive and pliable. They were about to discover their mistake. Patricia arrived promptly at 2, a slim leather portfolio tucked under her arm. We settled in James's study, which had increasingly become my command center for this unexpected battle. Before we begin, she said, opening her portfolio, I should clarify something. Robert mentioned you're interested in creating conditions for inheritance rather than simply disinheriting your children. While that's certainly possible, enforcement can be challenging, particularly with subjective requirements like regular visits or showing proper respect. I nodded, disappointed but not surprised. What would you recommend? Objective, measurable conditions tend to be more enforceable. For instance, completing addiction treatment, maintaining steady employment, or achieving educational milestones. I considered this. My children don't have addiction issues and they're all professionally successful. The problem isn't their achievement, it's their character. Patricia smiled sympathetically. Character conditions are the most difficult to enforce. However, there are other approaches we might consider. For example, staggered distributions over time rather than lump sums. Or charitable provisions that match what your children contribute to causes you care about. I like that last idea, I said, thinking of the cardiac care unit that had treated me with such compassion. What about creating separate provisions? For each child, tailored to their specific circumstances and behavior? Absolutely. Your will and trust documents don't have to treat all children identically. You can structure different provisions for each beneficiary. We spent the next 2 hours outlining a comprehensive plan. Michael, given his property ambitions and recent behavior, would receive the smallest share, primarily in the form of monetary gifts to his children for education. Becky would receive more, but with matching requirements for charitable contributions. Daniel, who had been distant but not actively hostile, would have a middle path. Most surprisingly to me, I decided to create a special trust for Ashley, separate from her parents' influence. It would provide for her education and initial housing needs when she reached adulthood, ensuring Michael and Jennifer couldn't control her access to these resources. What about your house? Patricia asked. That seems to be the primary asset Michael is interested in. I glanced around at the home James and I had lovingly maintained for decades. The house goes to a community land trust, with provisions that it be maintained as affordable housing for teachers or used as a community garden space. Michael can't have it, and he certainly can't tear it down for condos. Patricia made notes, her expression neutral but approving. And during your lifetime? I stay here in my home, making my own decisions. I paused, considering. But I'd like to add one safeguard. If I do ever need assistance or care, I want a committee of 3 people, not my children, to help make those decisions. My attorney, my doctor, and a trusted neighbor, perhaps. A care committee. That's an excellent precaution, and one courts tend to respect if it's properly established. When Patricia left, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The plan wasn't about revenge, though there was certainly an element of justice in denying Michael the property he so coveted. It was about reclaiming control, about ensuring my life's work and resources would be distributed according to my values, not seized by those who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to inheritance. That evening, as I tended to my garden, carefully, mindful of my recovery, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Daniel standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable and out of place. "Mom?" he said simply, shifting from foot to foot like he had as a teenager when in trouble. "Can we talk?" I stood in the doorway, examining my youngest son's face. Daniel had always been the most difficult to read of my children, quiet and introspective where Michael was assertive, elusive where Becky was direct. Now, at 42, his features had settled into a weathered handsomeness that reminded me painfully of James. Unlike Michael, who had inherited my fair coloring, Daniel was his father in miniature, dark hair now threaded with distinguished silver, the same deep-set eyes, the same hesitant half-smile. "Come in," I said finally, stepping aside. He entered cautiously, as if crossing a threshold into foreign territory rather than his childhood home. His gaze swept the entryway, taking in the familiar photographs, the antique hall table, the watercolor of Oakridge Harbor that James had painted on our 20th anniversary. "Nothing's changed," he murmured. "Some things have," I replied, leading him to the living room. "Would you like tea? Or something stronger?" "Just water, thanks." I fetched 2 glasses from the kitchen, giving myself a moment to gather my thoughts. Daniel's appearance was unexpected. Of my 3 children, he had been the least involved in my life in recent years, not out of the calculated neglect Michael had shown or the hurried dismissiveness of Becky, but from a kind of drifting detachment that had begun in his 20s. and gradually widened into an ocean between us. When I returned, he was standing by the fireplace, studying the family portrait taken at Becky's wedding 12 years ago. We all looked happy, expectant, unaware of how time would reshape our relationships. "Here," I said, offering the water. "Why don't you sit?" He settled awkwardly on the edge of the sofa. "Mom, I've been hearing some concerning things. About Michael trying to get guardianship, about you changing your will." So that was it. The rumor mill had begun turning, and Daniel had been dispatched, or had volunteered, to investigate. "All true," I confirmed, watching his expression. "I had a heart attack. None of my children visited me in the hospital for more than 20 minutes over 2 weeks." Upon my release, Michael immediately began pressuring me to move into assisted living and surrender my home. When I refused, he threatened guardianship proceedings, claiming my judgment was compromised. Daniel winced at the baldness of my summary. "That's not how Michael explained it." "I'm sure it wasn't. How did he explain it?" "He said you were being paranoid, that you'd become suspicious and hostile after your heart attack, refusing reasonable discussions about your care." I couldn't help but laugh, though the sound held no humor. Reasonable discussions? Is that what we're calling it when someone threatens legal action because their mother won't give them her house? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "He said you accused him of only wanting your property for development, because that's exactly what he does want." Ashley overheard him discussing how my house is worth more as a teardown for condos than as a single-family home. Those were his exact words. "Ashley is 16, Mom. She could have misinterpreted." "Don't." My voice sharpened. "Don't make excuses for him, and don't dismiss your niece as unreliable because of her age. She has more integrity in her little finger than her father has in his entire body." Daniel looked taken aback by my vehemence. "I'm just trying to understand what's happening." One minute everything seemed normal, and the next there's talk of legal battles and disinheritance. "Normal?" I repeated incredulously. "Is that what you call it when your mother has a heart attack and none of her children can be bothered to visit her? When was the last time you called me just to talk, Daniel? When was the last time you remembered my birthday without a reminder from your assistant?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "I've been busy." "Busy," I echoed. The universal excuse. Too busy for a phone call. Too busy for a hospital visit. But not, apparently, too busy to fly across the country when there's an inheritance at stake. Daniel flinched as if I'd slapped him. "That's not fair. I came because I'm concerned about you." "Are you? Or are you concerned about your share of the estate? Because I've noticed a pattern, Daniel. The only time my children show interest in my life is when they want something from me." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "This isn't you talking. The mother I know wouldn't say these things." "The mother you knew made excuses for her children's neglect. She pretended not to notice when birthdays were forgotten, when promises were broken, when her existence became an inconvenience. That woman died in a hospital room, Daniel, watching the door for visitors who never came." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of truth neither of us had acknowledged before. Daniel stared out at the garden, his back to me, shoulders rigid with tension or emotion. I couldn't tell which. "I should have come to the hospital," he said finally, his voice low. "There's no excuse for that." It was the first genuine admission of wrongdoing any of my children had offered. And it caught me off guard. I'd prepared for defensiveness, for manipulation, for the same dismissive tactics Michael and Jennifer had employed. I hadn't prepared for contrition. "Yes," I agreed softly. "You should have." He turned back to me, his expression pained. "I can't speak for Michael or Becky, but I owe you an explanation at least. Not an excuse. There isn't one. But the truth about why I've been so absent." "I'm listening." Daniel took a deep breath. "Do you remember when Dad died? How I took it harder than anyone? How I couldn't even speak at the funeral?" I nodded. Daniel had been 27 when James passed, already living his own life, but still the child most emotionally dependent on his father. I never really recovered from that, he continued. Not properly. I threw myself into work, into sailing, into anything that would keep me from thinking about the hole his absence left. And somewhere along the way, I started avoiding you too. Why? I asked, genuinely puzzled. Because you remind me of him. The way you talk, your expressions, how you always know exactly what question to ask, to cut to the heart of things. Being around you meant feeling his absence more acutely. It was such a simple explanation, and yet one that had never occurred to me. All these years, I'd assumed Daniel's distance stemmed from the same self-absorption that seemed to afflict his siblings. The idea that it came from grief, from a wound that had never properly healed, was both painful and strangely comforting. You could have told me, I said gently. I know, I should have. But the longer it went on, the harder it became to bridge that gap. And then it was just easier to stay away, to send gifts instead of visiting, to keep conversations brief and superficial. I considered his words, searching for the ring of truth in them. Daniel had always been more introspective than his siblings, more prone to internal struggles he rarely shared. What he was describing fit the son I had known. I believe you, I said finally, about your reasons for staying away, but it doesn't change the fact that when I needed you, needed any of my children, no one came. I know, he acknowledged, and I can't change that. But I want to try to do better now, if you'll let me. I studied him, trying to separate genuine remorse from the same self-serving manipulation Michael had displayed. Why now, Daniel? Why not 6 months ago or a year ago? Why does it take a crisis and potential changes to my will to bring you back? He flinched at the implication. I deserve that suspicion. But the truth is, I didn't even know about your heart attack until 4 days ago. I was on a sailing expedition in the Greek islands, completely off-grid. When I finally checked my messages in Athens, there were multiple voicemails from Becky about you being in the hospital, changing your will, blocking everyone's numbers. The timeline matched what I knew of Daniel's travel habits. He often disappeared, for weeks at a time, sailing or hiking in remote locations. So you flew straight here from Greece? I asked, softening slightly. I had a layover in London, but yes, I came as soon as I heard. He hesitated, then added, not because of the will, Mom, because I realized what I'd done, what we'd all done. And I couldn't stand the thought of that being how things ended between us. I wanted to believe him. After weeks of calculated manipulation from Michael and Becky, Daniel's apparent sincerity was like cool water in a desert. But caution had become my new companion. What do Michael and Becky expect you to accomplish here? Are you their emissary, sent to talk sense into me? They don't know I'm here, he admitted. I haven't spoken to either of them directly. I only know what was in Becky's messages, that you were changing your will, that Michael was concerned about your mental state, that there had been some kind of confrontation with Jennifer. This surprised me. They don't know you're here? No. I wanted to see you without their narrative coloring everything. To make my own assessment. And what have you assessed, Daniel? Am I the paranoid, hostile woman Michael describes? The confused, ill mother who needs to be managed for her own good? He met my gaze directly. No. You seem exactly like yourself. Sharp. Perceptive. Justifiably angry. If anything, more formidable than I remember. For the first time since he'd arrived, I felt a genuine smile tug at my lips. Formidable. Not a word often used to describe mothers. Maybe it should be. We sat in silence for a moment, the air between us charged with decades of unspoken emotions, his grief, my disappointment, the complicated love that persisted despite it all. What happens now? He asked finally. With the will, with Michael's guardianship threat, with everything? I considered how much to share. Daniel seemed sincere, but he was still caught in the middle of a family conflict with serious legal implications. I've taken steps to protect myself. A neuropsychological evaluation confirmed my cognitive function is well above average for my age. I've retained specialized legal counsel, and I'm restructuring my estate plans to reflect my current priorities and values, which don't include your children, he said, a statement rather than a question. Which include consequences for actions, I corrected. Michael's behavior has been manipulative and potentially predatory. Becky has been his willing accomplice. Your absence, while perhaps differently motivated, still left me vulnerable and alone during a health crisis. Daniel nodded slowly. That's fair. More than fair, honestly. His acceptance surprised me. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps, even the same entitlement Michael had displayed. Instead, he seemed to understand the basic principle at work. Actions have consequences. What would you need from me? He asked after a moment. To rebuild trust? The directness of the question caught me off guard. None of my children had ever asked what I needed, not regarding emotional support, not regarding my recovery, not regarding our relationship. Time, I said honestly. Consistency. Evidence that your concern extends beyond this current crisis and potential inheritance. That's reasonable. He reached for his water glass, taking a sip before continuing. For what it's worth, I don't need or want your money, Mom. I've done well for myself. Better than Becky knows, certainly better than Michael realizes. My companies went public last year. This was news to me. I knew Daniel had been involved in several tech startups, but we'd never discussed the details of his finances. I'm glad to hear that. But this isn't just about money, Daniel. It's about respect, about recognizing that I'm still a person with agency and dignity, not a problem to be managed or an asset to be claimed. I understand. He hesitated, then added, would it help if I spoke to Michael? Tried to get him to back off this guardianship nonsense? I considered this. Daniel had always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who could sometimes reason with Michael when no one else could. But intervention carried risks. It might make things worse, I said carefully. Michael already feels entitled to manage my affairs. If you intervene, it could reinforce his belief that I need to be handled by others. What if I made it clear I was supporting your independence, not trying to override it? That would depend on how Michael receives it. He's not in a rational place right now, Daniel. Jennifer's visit made that clear. They truly believe they're entitled to my property, that my resistance is a sign of mental deterioration rather than legitimate self-protection. Daniel's expression darkened. That's disturbing. Yes, it is, I agreed, which is why I've taken legal precautions. He nodded thoughtfully. I should probably let you know that Michael's business isn't doing as well as he pretends. There's been talk in industry circles about the Oakridge project being overextended, about investors pulling out. This confirmed what Ashley had overheard. How bad is it? Bad enough that he might be looking at personal bankruptcy if he can't secure additional financing or assets. Daniel's gaze met mine. Your property would be a significant asset, especially given the rezoning. The pieces clicked together with depressing clarity. Michael wasn't just being opportunistic, he was desperate. His push to get me into assisted living, his threat of guardianship, these weren't just about insensitivity or entitlement. They were last-ditch efforts to salvage his failing business. Thank you for telling me, I said. That information is helpful. Daniel nodded, understanding the implications without further explanation. What can I do to help? Practically speaking. I considered his offer. Stay in town for a while. Not here, I'm not ready for that. But nearby. Come. To meetings with my attorneys if they request it. And mostly just be present. Not as an intermediary between me and your siblings, but as a witness to whatever unfolds. I can do that. I've got a room at the Harborview Inn for now. I can extend my stay as long as needed. An awkward silence fell between us, both of us aware that we'd covered necessary ground, but hadn't truly reconnected as mother and son. 15 years of distance couldn't be bridged in a single conversation, no matter how frank. Would you like to see the garden? I offered finally. The daylilies you planted when you were in high school are blooming. Daniel's eyes widened, in surprise. They're still there? I wouldn't have thought they'd survive this long. I've taken care of them, I said simply, leading him to the back door. We walked the garden paths in companionable silence, the tension of our earlier conversation gradually easing as Daniel recognized plants he'd helped install as a teenager, asked questions about new additions, pointed out a nesting robin in the crabapple tree. You know, he said as we approached the daylilies he'd planted decades ago. I remember why I chose these particular ones. The tag said they were happy returns. They bloom multiple times in a season instead of just once. Yes, I confirmed, touching one of the cheerful yellow blooms. They've been remarkably resilient. Something in my tone must have conveyed more than the literal meaning of the words, because Daniel turned to me with unexpected intensity. I am sorry, Mom. Truly. Not just about the hospital, but about all of it. The years of distance, the missed birthdays, the times you needed someone and I wasn't there. The apology, offered without qualification or excuse, touched something in me I'd thought permanently hardened. I believe you, I said softly. And I appreciate you saying, I want to do better. I know I can't make up for the past, but going forward, I want to be someone you can count on. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak immediately. When I did, I simply said, that would be nice. As Daniel prepared to leave an hour later, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the front lawn. He paused on the porch, clearly reluctant to end our tentative reconciliation. Can I call you tomorrow? He asked. Maybe we could have lunch somewhere? I'd like that, I said, surprised to find I meant it. After he drove away, I returned to the kitchen and made myself a simple dinner, my mind replaying our conversation. Of my 3 children, Daniel had always been the hardest to predict, capable of profound thoughtfulness one moment and frustrating obliviousness the next. I wasn't naive enough to believe everything was resolved between us, but his visit had offered something I hadn't expected. Hope. The doorbell rang as I was clearing my plate. I opened it to find Raymond, still in his hospital scrubs, holding a folder. Sorry to stop by unannounced, he said, looking tired but determined. But I thought you should see this right away. I invited him in, leading him to the kitchen where I'd been sitting. What is it? Medical records, he said, placing the folder on the table. Yours, specifically. I was reviewing them as part of preparing documentation for your legal situation, and I noticed something concerning. A chill ran through me. What kind of concerning? There appears to have been an unauthorized access to your records the day before you were discharged. Someone using Michael's doctor's credentials viewed your file, including your medication list and discharge planning notes. I stared at him, processing the implications. Are you saying Michael had someone access my private medical information? That's what it looks like. The access came from outside the hospital network, which triggered a security flag in the system. I followed up with Dr. Brennan, Michael's primary care physician, and he confirmed he didn't access your records and wasn't involved in your care. That's illegal, isn't it? Completely. It's a serious HIPAA violation. And more concerning, your discharge medications were changed after this access occurred. My mouth went dry. Changed how? Raymond opened the folder, pointing to a section highlighted in yellow. Originally, you were prescribed a standard dose of Coreg for your blood pressure. After the unauthorized access, it was increased to twice the recommended starting dose for someone of your age and weight. What would that do? Potentially cause dizziness, fatigue, confusion, symptoms that could be interpreted as cognitive decline, especially in someone recovering from a cardiac event. The implication was so disturbing I could barely process it. Are you suggesting that Michael had my medication altered to make me appear mentally compromised? Raymond's expression was grave. I can't prove intent, but the timing is extremely suspicious, especially given his subsequent push for guardianship based on alleged cognitive impairment. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unsteady. How did you catch this? Pure luck, honestly. I was comparing your hospital discharge meds with what your cardiologist prescribed at your follow-up and noticed the discrepancy. Dr. Keller had already reduced your Coreg dose at your first post-discharge visit because your blood pressure was running too low. Have you reported this? Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first, since it involves your family. He hesitated. Ellie, if Michael is behind this, it goes well beyond family squabbles over inheritance. Tampering with medical records and medication orders is criminal. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my thoughts. The Michael I had raised, the little boy who brought me dandelion bouquets, the teenager who fixed our leaky kitchen faucet without being asked, the young man who wept at his father's funeral, seemed impossibly distant from the person who would do something so calculating, so dangerous. I need to think, I said finally. This changes everything. Raymond nodded, understanding my need for space. Take whatever time you need. But Ellie, please be careful. Check your medications carefully. Don't leave drinks unattended if certain family members are visiting. I don't want to sound alarmist, but my son may have deliberately tampered with my medication to make me appear incompetent, I finished for him. That's not alarmism, Raymond. That's a reasonable concern based on evidence. After Raymond left, I sat in the darkening kitchen, the folder of medical records untouched before me. Part of me wanted to dismiss the whole thing as a misunderstanding, a clerical error, anything but the deliberate manipulation it appeared to be. But the cold, rational part of my mind, the part that had been silently documenting my children's neglect for years, recognized the pattern. Michael needed my assets. He'd tried persuasion. He'd tried intimidation. When those failed, had he resorted to something more sinister? The thought made me physically ill. I picked up my phone and dialed Robert's number. Ellie? He answered, sounding surprised at the late call. Is everything all right? No, I said simply. I need to see you first thing tomorrow. Something's happened, something that changes our approach completely. What is it? I'd rather explain in person, but Robert, I think we need to consider a restraining order against Michael, and possibly criminal charges. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Finally, Robert said quietly, I'll clear my morning schedule. Come to the office at 9. Sleep eluded me that night. I kept replaying conversations with Michael, searching for signs I might have missed, clues to the depth of his desperation, the extent to which he might go to secure what he wanted. Had there been a moment when I could have intervened, when I might have recognized how far things had deteriorated? Or had this coldness always been there, carefully concealed beneath the veneer of dutiful son? Dawn found me at the kitchen table, a cup of cooling tea before me, Raymond's folder open to the pages documenting the medication changes. In the clear morning light, the implications seemed even more disturbing than they had the night before. If Michael had indeed tampered with my medical care, it wasn't just a betrayal of our relationship. It was a calculated attempt to undermine my autonomy, my health, possibly even my life. The thought that my own child could view me with such cold instrumentality was almost unbearable. Yet as I prepared for my meeting with Robert, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The grief and anger that had dominated my emotional landscape since the hospital stay were giving way to something clearer, more focused, a determination to protect myself by whatever means necessary. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit I hadn't worn since retiring from teaching, applied makeup with particular attention, and styled my hair more formally than had become my habit in recent years. If I was going to discuss potential criminal charges against my son, I wanted to look every inch the composed, competent woman I knew myself to be. As I was gathering my purse and the folder of medical records, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Becky standing on my porch, her professional demeanor firmly in place, crisp pantsuit, perfect makeup, the polished appearance of a woman accustomed to commanding attention in corporate boardrooms. I hesitated, tempted to ignore the bell and slip out the back. But something, perhaps the same steely resolve that had carried me through the past few weeks, made me open the door. "Mom," Becky began with practiced cordiality, "we need to talk." "We can talk later," I said, keeping my hand firmly on the door. "I have an appointment." Becky's practiced smile faltered. She wasn't accustomed to resistance, especially from me. "This is important, Mom. Family, important." "So is my appointment." I reached for my purse and the folder of medical records on the side table. "If you'd like to schedule a time to meet, you can call my attorney." Her eyebrows shot up. "Your attorney? Really, Mom? That's how we're handling family discussions now?" I met her gaze steadily. When the family discussion involves potential medication tampering and fraudulent guardianship claims, yes. The color drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" "Ask your brother." I stepped onto the porch, forcing her to back up. "Now, if you'll excuse me." "Mom, wait." But I was already walking down the steps to my car, ignoring her calls behind me. There had been a time when Becky's distress would have stopped me in my tracks, when her slightest discomfort would have been my highest priority to address. That time was past. As I drove to Robert's office, my phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from both Becky and Michael. I ignored them all. Whatever damage control they were attempting would have to wait. For the first time in decades, my needs came first. Robert was waiting in the lobby when I arrived, his expression serious but reassuring. "This way, Ellie. Patricia is joining us." In the conference room, I laid out the folder of medical records on the polished table. Raymond Peters. Discovered this yesterday. There was unauthorized access to my medical records using Dr. Brennan's credentials, Michael's doctor. My discharge medications were altered after this access. Patricia and Robert exchanged alarmed glances as they reviewed the highlighted sections. "The timing corresponds with Michael's push for guardianship," Patricia noted, flipping through the pages. "And the medication change could potentially cause symptoms that might appear as cognitive impairment." "Yes," I confirmed. "Raymond believes it was deliberate." Robert's expression had grown increasingly grave. "Ellie, if this is what it appears to be, we're beyond civil matters. This is criminal, potentially assault, medical fraud, identity theft." "I understand." My voice remained steady despite the churning in my stomach. "What do we do?" They laid out my options with professional clarity. We could report the medical records breach to law enforcement immediately. We could use it as leverage to force Michael to back off the guardianship claim. We could proceed with both civil and criminal actions simultaneously. "Before we make any decisions," Patricia cautioned, "we should verify the information independently. Hospital record systems are complex. What appears to be tampering could potentially be explained by other factors." Robert nodded in agreement. "I'll have our investigator look into it, discreetly. In the meantime, we should accelerate finalizing your new estate plan and formally contesting any guardianship petition before it can gain traction. By the time our meeting concluded 3 hours later, we had a comprehensive strategy in place. My new will and trust documents would be ready for signature the following day. A statement from Raymond documenting my mental and physical competence had been prepared. Letters to Michael's attorney, formally rejecting any claim of diminished capacity and threatening counteraction, were drafted and ready to send. "One more thing," Robert said as we wrapped up. "I'd advise installing security cameras at your home, Ellie. Given what we've discovered, it's a reasonable precaution." The suggestion sent a chill through me, the idea that I needed protection from my own children, but I nodded in agreement. "I'll arrange it today." When I returned home, my driveway was blocked by Michael's Mercedes and Becky's Audi. They were waiting on my front porch, a united front of entitled indignation. Daniel's rental car was nowhere to be seen. I parked on the street and approached slowly, gripping my purse and the folder of medical records like shields. "Mom," Michael began immediately, his tone a practiced blend of concern and authority. "We need to discuss what's happening. These accusations you're making, they're completely unfounded." "Which accusations specifically?" I asked, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. My directness seemed to throw him momentarily. "Becky mentioned something about medication tampering? That's absurd. I would never access my medical records without permission," I interrupted. "Never use your doctor's credentials to do so? Never increase my blood pressure medication to twice the recommended dose?" His face betrayed him, a flicker of panic quickly masked by indignation. "That's a serious allegation." "Yes, it is. One with documented evidence that's now in my attorney's hands." Becky stepped forward, ever the mediator. "Mom, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. We're all under stress. Your health scare, these conflicts about your living situation, it's creating paranoia and suspicion where none is warranted." The smooth corporate tone, the careful framing. It was a performance I'd seen many times in family discussions, but never before had I recognized it so clearly for what it was: manipulation. "No misunderstanding," I said calmly. "The hospital's security system flagged unauthorized access to my records. The IP address has been traced. The medication change occurred immediately after this access. These are facts, Becky, not paranoia." Michael's expression hardened. "You've lost perspective, Mom. This obsession with imagined conspiracies, these wild accusations, it only confirms our concerns about your mental state." "My mental state was formally evaluated yesterday by a neuropsychologist who found me to be in the top percentile for cognitive function in my age group. That report is also with my attorney." I regarded them both coldly. "Would either of you care to undergo the same evaluation? I'd be interested in the results." Michael flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous." "No, what's ridiculous is that my children abandoned me during a health crisis, then suddenly developed an intense interest in my welfare when they realized my house could solve financial problems they've been hiding from me," Becky gasped. "That's not—" "Michael's Westridge project is failing. Investors are pulling out. He needs assets to avoid personal bankruptcy." I turned to her. "And your company is in the middle of a restructuring that's left your position vulnerable, hasn't it? That's why you've been working such long hours. Why you couldn't spare time to visit your mother in the hospital." Their shocked expressions confirmed I'd hit my mark. Information truly was power, and for once, I had more of it than they did. "How did you—" Becky began, then stopped herself. "I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I have resources, connections." I gestured toward my house, "and apparently something you both desperately want." Michael recovered first, his voice hardening. "You're making a mistake, Mom, a serious one. We're trying to help you, to protect you, and you're twisting it into something ugly. The only thing ugly here is tampering with an elderly woman's medication to make her appear incompetent so you can seize control of her assets. I met his gaze directly. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was that helpless? This is insane, he hissed, but his eyes darted away, unable to maintain contact with mine. I want you both to leave, I said evenly. Any further communication can go through my attorneys. Mom, please, Becky tried once more, her voice softening to the cajoling tone she'd used since childhood when she wanted something. We're family. We can work this out without lawyers. We stopped being a family the moment your brother decided my house was worth more than my well-being. I climbed the steps, forcing them to move aside. Now get off my property before I call the police. As I unlocked my door, Michael made one last desperate attempt. You can't just cut us out, Mom. We're your children, your heirs. I turned to face them one final time. No, Michael. You're adults who made choices, and now you'll live with the consequences of those choices. I stepped inside and closed the door firmly behind me. Through the window, I watched them standing on my porch, momentarily stunned by the confrontation. Then Michael's face contorted with rage. He raised his hand as if to pound on the door, but Becky caught his arm, whispering urgently. After a tense moment, they retreated to their cars and drove away. I sank onto the bench in my entryway, my legs suddenly unsteady. The confrontation had taken more out of me than I wanted to admit. But beneath the exhaustion was something else, a fierce, clarifying pride. I had stood my ground. I had spoken truth to the children who had taken my silence for weakness all these years. The doorbell rang again, startling me from my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Daniel standing on the porch, looking concerned. Mom, are you okay? He called through the door. I just saw Michael and Becky tearing out of here. I opened the door cautiously. Did they send you? No, he said, looking confused. I was coming by to see if you still wanted to get lunch. We had talked about it yesterday, remember? The simple, normal request, lunch with my son, struck me as surreally incongruous after the morning's events. I laughed, though the sound held little humor. Mom? Daniel's concern deepened. What happened? I gestured for him to come in, then told him about the medical records tampering, about my meeting with the attorneys, about the confrontation with Michael and Becky. Daniel listened in shocked silence, his expression darkening as the full picture emerged. That's criminal, he said finally. Actually criminal, not just morally wrong. Yes, I agreed. That's exactly what my attorneys said. Are you going to press charges? I sighed, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years. I don't know yet. Part of me wants Michael to face real consequences for what he's done. But another part still sees him as your son, Daniel finished quietly. Yes. Stupid, isn't it? After everything, I still remember holding him as a baby, teaching him to ride a bike, helping him with his college applications. I shook my head. Maternal love is remarkably persistent, even when it shouldn't be. Daniel reached out hesitantly, placing his hand over mine. It's not stupid, Mom. It's human. And it's what separates you from them, honestly. The observation struck me with surprising force. Yes, that was the difference. I still saw them as whole people, as my children despite their flaws. They had reduced me to an asset, an obstacle, a means to an end. You're right, I said softly. Thank you for that perspective. Daniel squeezed my hand. You don't have to decide anything today, about charges, about the will, about any of it. Give yourself time. His genuine concern, so different from the calculated performances of his siblings, touched something in me that had been frozen for too long. For the first time since James died, I felt the presence of family in the true sense of the word, someone who saw me as a person, not just a role or a resource. I think I'd like that lunch now, I said, managing a small smile. I could use a change of scenery. Over sandwiches at a small cafe downtown, Daniel told me more about his life, his sailing adventures, his tech companies, his volunteer work teaching coding to disadvantaged youth. It was the kind of conversation we should have been having for years, the natural exchange of a mother and son catching up on each other's lives. I've been thinking about moving back to this area, he said as we finished our meal. I've been too untethered for too long. Because of what's happening with me? I asked, not wanting his decision to be based on crisis or obligation. Partly, he admitted, but mostly because this whole situation has made me realize what I've been missing. Community, roots, meaningful connections. I nodded, understanding. Daniel had always been the searcher in the family, looking for purpose beyond career success or material acquisition. In that way, he was most like James. This town could use more good people, I said simply. We parted with plans to meet again the following day. As I drove home, I felt a curious lightness despite the morning's confrontations. Something had shifted, not just in my relationships with my children, but in my relationship with myself. I was no longer the accommodating mother, the background character in my own life. I had reclaimed my voice, my agency, my right to determine my own path. At home, I found Rita from next door waiting on my porch with a small group of neighbors. "Surprise garden committee meeting," she announced cheerfully. "Stan has some ideas for extending your irrigation system, and Diane brought catalogs for fall bulb planting." I blinked back unexpected tears. This improvised community, neighbors who had become friends, a doctor who had become an ally, an attorney who had become a fierce advocate, had changed everything for me. While my children had abandoned me in my moment of need, these people had stepped forward, asking nothing in return except the pleasure of my company. "Come in," I said warmly. "I'll make iced tea." As we gathered around my kitchen table, poring over garden catalogs and debating the merits of various bulb combinations, the simple normalcy of it was a balm to my spirit. Life would go on. My garden would bloom again next spring, with or without my children's participation. The next day, I signed my new estate planning documents in Robert's office. The provisions were firm, but fair. Michael would receive a modest cash bequest, nothing more. Becky's share was slightly larger, but structured as a charitable remainder, trust that would ultimately benefit the hospital's cardiac care unit. Daniel would receive a more substantial inheritance, reflecting his recent efforts at reconciliation, but even that came with conditions requiring continued meaningful engagement. In my life, most of my estate would now benefit causes I believed in: scholarships for future teachers, support for the local botanical garden, funding for cardiac care and research. Ashley would receive a separate trust for her education and early adult needs, carefully structured to prevent Michael and Jennifer from accessing it. "Are you comfortable with these terms?" Robert asked as I signed the final page. "Very," I confirmed. "They reflect my values and priorities accurately." "And regarding the medical records issue, have you decided how to proceed?" I had given this considerable thought over the past 24 hours, weighing justice against peace, retribution against closure. "I want the hospital to conduct a full investigation," I said finally. "They need to address the security breach, and there should be consequences for whoever accessed my records improperly. But I'm not seeking criminal charges against Michael personally. At least not yet." Robert nodded, understanding. "A reasonable approach. It establishes boundaries without escalating the conflict unnecessarily." As I left his office, my phone buzzed with a text from Raymond. "Security system installation team arriving at your house at 2 p.m. I'll stop by after my shift to make sure everything's set up properly." His thoughtfulness brought a smile to my face. Our friendship had deepened, remarkably in the weeks since my hospital stay. While I wasn't ready to define it as anything more than friendship, I found myself looking forward to his visits, enjoying his company in a way I hadn't enjoyed anyone since James. The security system was a necessary precaution, not just against potential intrusions from Michael, but as documentation should any further questionable incidents occur. The team installed discrete cameras covering all entrances and the perimeter of the property, along with a monitoring system I could access from my phone or computer. "All set, Mrs. Wilson," the lead technician said as they finished. "The system's active now. You'll get alerts for any unexpected movement or access attempts." I thanked them, trying not to dwell on the strangeness of needing such protection from my own family. As promised, Raymond stopped by after his shift to review the setup with me. "This is good," he said, examining the camera placements. "Comprehensive coverage without being obtrusive. And the mobile alerts give you an extra layer of security." We settled on the back porch with glasses of lemonade, watching the evening light gild the garden. There was an easy comfort between us now, the natural rhythm of two people who enjoyed each other's company without demands or expectations. "How are you really doing with all this?" he asked after a comfortable silence. "It's a lot to process." I considered the question carefully. "I'm sad," I admitted. "Sad that my relationship with two of my children has deteriorated to this point. Sad that it took a health crisis and inheritance dispute for me to see clearly what had been happening for years." He nodded, understanding. "But I'm also, I don't know if relieved is the right word," I continued. "There's a clarity now that wasn't there before. I'm no longer making excuses for inexcusable behavior. I'm no longer diminishing my own needs and worth to accommodate their convenience." "That's not just clarity," Raymond observed. "That's strength." Perhaps he was right. The woman I had been before the heart attack, the one who made excuses for her children's neglect, who accepted crumbs of attention with pathetic gratitude, seemed like a stranger to me now. "My mother used to say that difficult times show us who people really are," I mused. I always thought she meant we discover the hidden strength in others during crises. Now I wonder if she meant we discover their true character, and our own. "Probably both," Raymond suggested. "Crisis strips away pretense. We act from our core selves, for better or worse." 3 days later, Daniel helped me host a garden party for my neighbors and new friends. We set up tables on the lawn, strung fairy lights through the trees, and prepared simple but elegant refreshments. Rita brought her famous lemon bars. Stan arrived with a wooden garden bench he'd crafted himself, a gift to replace the aging stone one where I often sat to read. Diane came with 3 new members of the book club in tow, eager to invite me to their next meeting. Raymond arrived last, looking slightly out of place in casual clothes rather than his usual scrubs, but his warm smile as he greeted me suggested he was happy to be included in this gathering of my unofficial support system. As twilight settled over the garden and conversation flowed around me, I found myself observing the scene with a sense of wonder. These people, some I'd known peripherally, for years, others who had entered my life only recently, had become more family to me than my own children. They checked on me without being asked. They offered help without expectation of inheritance. They valued my company for itself, not as an obligation or a means to an end. Daniel moved easily among them, his natural charm and genuine interest, making him welcome in this impromptu community. Watching him refill glasses and engage in animated conversation with Diane about her recent trip to Portugal, I felt a cautious hope. Perhaps one branch of my family tree could be salvaged, could grow in healthier directions. The party was winding down when my phone buzzed with a security alert. I checked the screen to see Michael's car pulling into my driveway, captured by the newly installed front camera. Daniel noticed my expression change. "What is it?" "Michael's here," I said quietly, showing him the alert. "Want me to handle it?" he offered immediately. I considered this, then shook my head. "No, but I'd appreciate it if you stayed nearby. As I made my way to the front yard, I was acutely aware of how different this confrontation would be from our last one. This time I wasn't alone. This time I had witnesses, documentation, support. Michael emerged from his car looking uncharacteristically disheveled, his typically immaculate appearance frayed at the edges, his expression haggard. He stopped short when he saw the gathering in the backyard, visible through the side gate. "What's all this?" he asked, gesturing toward the party. "A garden party," I replied simply, "for my friends." His gaze swept over the scene, taking in Daniel among the guests, the easy camaraderie evident even from a distance. Something like confusion, or perhaps jealousy, flickered across his face. "I need to talk to you," he said, lowering his voice. "Privately?" "Whatever you have to say can be said right here." His jaw tightened at the rejection. "Fine. I came to tell you the hospital is investigating a security breach involving your records. They contacted me today." "Yes, I know. I reported it." This clearly wasn't the response he'd expected. "Mom, you're making a serious mistake. These accusations—" "Not accusations, Michael. Documentation. Evidence." I folded my arms, standing my ground. "The hospital takes HIPAA violations very seriously." "I didn't—" he began, then stopped himself, visibly regrouping. "I came here to try to make peace, to find a way forward for our family." "Peace requires accountability," I said evenly. "Accountability starts with honesty." For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the son I remembered in his eyes, a hint of the child who had once understood right from wrong. Then it was gone, replaced by the calculating look I'd grown to recognize. "I'm trying to protect this family's legacy," he said, his tone hardening. "The house, the assets Dad worked so hard to build, they should stay in the family, not be squandered on strangers." That legacy was never just about property or money, Michael. It was about values, integrity, care for others. I shook my head sadly. "You've forgotten that part. And you've forgotten who you're talking to." He snapped, his facade cracking. "I'm not one of your students to be lectured. I'm your son, your heir." "You're an adult who made choices," I corrected him, echoing my words from our last confrontation. "And now you're living with the consequences of those choices." Daniel appeared at my side, his presence a silent statement of support. Behind him, I was aware of Raymond and several neighbors moving closer, drawn by the tension in our exchange. Michael glanced at this impromptu audience, his expression darkening. "You've turned everyone against me, made me out to be some kind of villain." No, Michael. Your actions did that." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "The hospital will complete its investigation. My new estate plan is already signed and filed. This isn't a negotiation or a threat. It's simply information you should have." For a moment, he looked as if he might argue further. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to his car, the set of his shoulders radiating anger and defeat. As he drove away, Daniel placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I nodded, surprised to find it was true. "Yes, I'm okay." We rejoined the party, where conversation had resumed with deliberate normalcy, though I caught concerned glances from Raymond and Rita. I appreciated their tactful restraint in not pressing for details about the confrontation. As the last guests departed and Daniel helped me clear away the remnants of the gathering, a peaceful quiet settled over the garden. Fireflies had begun their nightly display, pinpricks of light dancing among the flowers like earthbound stars. "You know," Daniel said as we finished stacking chairs, "I was thinking about what you said yesterday, about maternal love being persistent even when it shouldn't be. What about it?" "I think that persistence is what makes it valuable. Anyone can love someone who's perfect, who never disappoints them. The real test is continuing to love through flaws and failures. He hesitated. Even Michael, with everything he's done. You still love him, don't you? The question caught me off guard with its simple truth. Yes, I admitted softly. I do. Not in a way that excuses his actions or shields him from consequences, but yes, he's still my son. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. That's your strength, Mom. Not a weakness. Later that night, after Daniel had gone back to his hotel with promises to return the next day, I sat alone in my garden. The security lights cast gentle illumination across the flower beds, highlighting textures and shadows invisible in daylight. My phone buzzed with a text from Becky. We need to talk. Just us. Please. I considered ignoring it, maintaining the boundary I'd established. But Daniel's words about persistent love echoed in my mind. Setting boundaries wasn't the same as cutting ties completely. Perhaps there was still a conversation worth having. Not about inheritance or property, but about truth and reconciliation. Tomorrow, I texted back. 1 p.m., the cafe on Maple Street. Her response came immediately. I'll be there. Thank you. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and gazed up at the night sky, visible in patches through the tree canopy. James and I had often sat here on summer evenings, planning futures that seemed limitless then. Vacations we would take when the children were grown, projects we would complete together in retirement, grandchildren we would spoil. Life had taken different turns than we'd anticipated. Widowhood had come too early. Children had grown into adults I barely recognized. Relationships I'd assumed were unbreakable had revealed their fragility. Yet here I was, still standing, still growing, still capable of setting boundaries and extending grace in equal measure. My children were too busy to visit me in the hospital, and now I was too busy to include them in my will. But perhaps in time, we might find a new way to be family, one built on mutual respect rather than obligation, on earned trust rather than assumed entitlement. In the meantime, I had a garden to tend, friendships to nurture, a life to reclaim, as fully and vibrantly my own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.